It looks to me like the Monday morning budgeting meeting has just begun. Let's listen in.
Shauna, we can't hear you. You're a mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Shauna, we can hear you now.
I was just saying how I worked 50 hours this week.
What? Only 50 hours? I worked 60 and stopped wearing pants to save time on getting dressed.
60 hours? You guys are part-timers. I work 70, and I'm calling in while on vacation in Mexico.
Hold on a second. I'm in Mexico too. Wait, is that you with the laptop at the bar? Jason, it's me, Jeff. On the other side of the pool. Over here.
Jeff!
Hey, since you're already there, can you order me a margarita? Extra salt on the rim, please. Preventing burnout in the workplace. It's what we're talking about today. This is the Insights at Work podcast. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Insights at Work podcast, the podcast that looks at what's happening in the HR world, takes your questions and studies the research to help HR experts move forward. It's prepared by HR experts for HR experts. We tend to think of burnout as a problem we can solve with some yoga, maybe a meditation app, or a new health and wellness program. Sure, self-care is important, but is it really the answer? And who is really responsible for preventing burnout in the workplace? Well, we're gonna talk about that today with one of North America's leading burnout experts. And that is Jennifer Moss. Jennifer and I have worked together before delivering an ADP masterclass where we looked into this very topic. I knew she was coming out with a new book about preventing burnout, and I asked her to come on the Insights at Work podcast. So, Jennifer, for those in the audience who may not know who you are, why don't you fill them in?
Well, it's great to see you again, Jeff, and for us to have this conversation. I really enjoyed the ADP masterclass. It was so fantastic to be part of that. But essentially, my work has been in workplace expertise, really focusing on culture, developing well-being and wellness programming, but also consulting and strategizing with leaders on how to implement those strategies inside of the workplace. But, I kind of joke that I've gone from being a happiness expert to an unhappiness expert because I have, really focused on the happiness piece. But what I came to understand is that a lot of people are actually really suffering, and mental health and the lack of supports around mental health are a big cause of burnout. And so through that process of learning what is really causing unhappiness at work, it brought me to the research. And so, of course, I would have never expected that the pandemic would have exacerbated this issue to quite this level. I started writing the book before the pandemic, but wow, we've really seen some huge shifts in even just the state of work. And so that's been my trajectory, is sort of learning around, and spending time around the happiness space, but now focusing on upstream interventions for burnout.
Well, Jennifer, I'll refer to you today as a happiness expert.
That's where all roads should go, right? If we can solve for the chronic stress and we can prevent burnout, then hopefully we can have happier workplaces.
I agree. Well, I just finished your book, The Burnout Epidemic, and it's a great read. You cover so much in it. Awesome research, fantastic real-life stories, and practical tips to identify, combat, and prevent burnout. But before we get to so many of your great insights, I wanted to ask you to share the meaning behind a term you reference in the first few pages of the book. Now, to be honest, I did read all 43 pages of the book, so don't think I or the Insights at Crew Work skimped out on our research.
So what was the definition that you were trying to get me to help you figure out here?
The term that really stuck out to me is Karoshi, a Japanese saying. Can you fill the listeners in on what Karoshi is?
The fact that Japan has a definition for death by overwork, which is karoshi, was shocking. And the fact that it's such a prevalent issue that they have to define it, and they still have yet to really identify ways to fix it. they know that it means reducing overwork. They know that it means that, we have to stop expecting people to work 70, 80 hours a week. And yet we're still seeing increases of that over death by overwork occurring in Japan and elsewhere around the globe.
I did read, I know the book is really 269 pages, not 40 pages.
I didn't want to correct you.
So, Jennifer, do you think that we're experiencing a crisis right now? So you've named the book The Burnout Epidemic. Is that where workers and workplaces find themselves right now?
They do. I mean, you and I have had this conversation before just about how much it has been expanding, and it's reaching all different parts of the globe right now. And before the pandemic, pre-pandemic, burnout was a really big problem. It contributed to 2.8 million deaths per year, when specifically just overwork alone. And, really great research has come out to share, even that's contributed to the World Health Organization's requirement that or strong recommendation that we don't work over 55 hours a week, because it leads to heart disease and health problems. And yet it is a major catastrophic issue that's happening globally. And when I did my research, we got data from 46 different countries that said basically burnout is universal. So, capture all that data pre-pandemic, and then you have a global crisis. And then of course those things collide, and it's just expanded even further.
So you give this great example in the book where workers bring canaries into a coal mine, and understandably they get sick. And you ask the reader to reflect on whether it's the canary's fault that they got sick, or was it the mine workers' fault for bringing them into that unhealthy environment. Now, it made me think immediately of how we as workers prescribe to ourselves yoga or meditation apps to lessen the effects of burnout. But at the end of the day, shouldn't we be looking at the workplace to change the environment, so we don't need those yoga sessions and those meditation apps in the first place?
Absolutely. And I liken, sort of this concept of giving ice cream to people that need water. We need to be, making sure that people don't fall in the river instead of bailing them out. And that's exactly what's happening right now. People are sort of just swimming and drowning, and then we think, okay, we'll bail them out. But that's not really helping, and it's cyclical. So it never actually gets resolved. And so when the organization wraps their mind around that and says, okay, we are the cause, or we contribute to burnout, that's the only way that we're going to actually solve it for good.
Now, you write in the book quite a bit about how if you don't look after the pebbles, they're going to turn into boulders. And I think a lot of my own aha moments when I really recognize, hey, you know what? It's time for a change. It happens when those pebbles become boulders and we finally make that decision in the moment to make a change.
Well, there's so many examples just anecdotally that I've learned from interviews and conversations. There's a really great one around the broken printer in the nurses station, where they're running down the hall constantly trying to print out patient information. It's reducing effectiveness and efficiencies. They're exhausted by the end of the day, because not only can they just not do these simple tasks, but they're frustrated and running down, and they're all scrambling around this printer to try to print out these patient documents. And the thing is it wasn't until the CEO walked around and looked at some of these issues and wondered what was going on and wanted to fix morale, because there was so much toxicity and people were frustrated. They were nitpicking with each other, and there was sort of infighting, where he realized that this simple issue, this broken down printer, was causing people all of these stressors. It was about $150 to fix this stupid printer. And then of course, all of the feedback was, thank you so much for coming and listening to our problems. Thanks for walking around and caring about what was bothering us. Thanks for taking, time out of your busy schedule. So it wasn't just that it was fixing the printer. It was, I'm listening to you. I care. It develops trust. It makes you feel heard. And that's all part of these little pebbles that seem innocuous. They just make a statement. It's like a big prime that says, I don't care about you. And that's what we need to adjust. And you only do that by actually, as senior leaders, connecting in with the people that are doing the work for you and representing your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you refer to the 6 causes of burnout. Let's just spend a little bit of time talking about what are the causes that really speak to you.
Well, workload was always the leading cause. Pre-pandemic, now it is. It's just there's a culture of overwork. I think even in your intro, which I loved, is this idea of you're macho and cool and awesome if you're working on your vacay and you're calling in, and that demonstrates how much you care about your job. And the unfortunate thing is that's celebrated. I mean, we used to see that just with life on site and some of these, big campus organizations where the more you were there, the more you were seen, whether you were even productive or working or not. It was about being seen to demonstrate that you were working. A lot of that sort of heroism around overwork has plagued so many industries, including healthcare, including finance and technology, and so many others. And I think that that has been the biggest one that we've seen this year just explode.
Now, in regards to workload itself, what do you think about governments around the world trying to introduce the right to disconnect from work laws like they've done in France?
I think having work-life boundaries is so critical. And we talk about work-life integration, we talk about work-life balance, but I think right now it's about work-life boundaries. So that piece needs to be mandated, protected. We need to make sure that there are institutional ways of thinking about it so that it's not necessarily always, at the manager level to make those discretions. It should be just part of what we think about as a responsible way, a corporate responsibility to manage people's burnout.
Now, another one of the causes of burnout that you refer to is the perceived lack of control. And you identify a way that a team member can ensure that they've got a greater sense of control over what's happening and the input provided by the team. Now, you talk about in the book someone who's called the person with the black hat.
So I love this process, and this isn't one that I came up with on my own. It was actually based out of research that was done when a consultant came into NASA after Challenger, and they were there to understand why there was a breakdown. And in this case, it impacted people's lives. It was a life or death issue. And what they found was that the reason why there were these breakdowns in communication were that people didn't have a seat at the table, or they didn't feel like they could speak up, or if they spoke up, that they would be put down and then their words didn't matter. So we need to build psychological safety. Maybe it's not life or death in our organizations, but it really does matter to creating, healthy culture, good thoughts, innovation, ideation, where we need to have someone come in there. And I say the black hat, but I think in the book, I refer to it as the black robe, be the dissenting opinion, be RBG. Yeah.
It's the black hat. I read the book, Jennifer. It's the black hat.
Yes. So I do say, like, if you want to, take it up a notch, put on the dissenting robe, the RBG role, but we need to switch that around and have it so that we have everyone take a turn. So someone who might not feel comfortable basically playing devil's advocate or playing the opposite role or opposite opinion to what is being discussed inside of an ideation meeting, we need to give them that permission to be able to just be the opposing force in that conversation. That gives people the confidence to feel like that they can be seen and heard, and their sentiments are accepted.
One thing that I found really interesting with your research was that maybe it's time that rather than always recognizing people for the sales or the revenues or the units closed, rather than celebrating that, we celebrate something different. So what is that different thing we could celebrate publicly with the team?
We should be celebrating when people are being human-centered, that when they are designing programs that really focus on empathy, that when they're showing that a commitment to diversity and inclusion in their behaviors, in the way that they design their communication with their teams, the way that they lead. We should be celebrating people for taking time off without emailing while they're away. We should celebrate when people go and take time for themselves and their families, reverse this whole You're seen. I'm going to be excited that you're here. This is great that you're here. Make a point to share when someone actually takes time for themselves and does something that's healthy and contributes to that overall well-being culture.
One of the things that we did in the first 6 months of the pandemic was it was a company-wide town hall. I was looking after our daughter at that time. She was doing virtual school, and it was like just a crazy, crazy time because I'm not a teacher, I'm not a chef. And so what I did for my presentation was a performance review of me. Like it was 1 star out of 5 that I was given pretty much for everything, and just what a terrible parent I was. And I just shared that with everyone else that, hey, you all are in the same. And you know what? Maybe, and it is okay sometimes to let them watch TV during the day because you got to get work done.
I love that vulnerability and humility piece. Everyone's saying, what can we do as leaders? What can we do, to demonstrate that we care about burnout? And I keep saying, show them that you're human. Show them that you are going through the same things that they are all going through. Create some parity in your team and don't feel like you have to be stoic. I know that there's this, and I've seen this, where there's this expectation of stoicism, and they broke away from that in their organizations. They were so afraid of breaking away from that. And they said it was like such freedom. And my team loved me for it. And I'm having way better, all those other metrics, that we measure all the time and celebrate, they were way better because I just let my guard down. And people just need to take the next move around that right now.
I think it's about, really, it's at the end of the day, it's about being authentic.
It is. And authenticity is such a critical skill and a special part of a culture. We just are so programmed to think that we have to wear hats in different environments. And, I learned really early on when I was a tech founder and a female in this role. And I remember getting some advice from one woman that said, just never talk about your kids around these investors because, they'll diminish you or they won't take you seriously. And I'm like, hell no. I am a proud mom. I think it is what makes me more grounded. It's what makes me more fired up to do something that creates change in the world. And so I went totally against that in an environment where that was, not to be discussed. And you're now seeing a lot of women just say, that's the holistic part of me. And the more that we get comfortable with that, the more we actually start to change that paradigm.
Yeah, I agree. Now, is there a generation that's at the greatest risk of burnout? Does it affect one generation than another?
We're obviously seeing that, vulnerable groups are more disproportionately impacted. Women over men are more likely to burn out. We see a lot of compassion and empathy fatigue in those certain sectors that are more prone to burnout. But then from a generational standpoint, Gen Zs and millennials are the most likely to burn out, and they are the most burned out generation across the entire workforce right now. A lot of that just has to do with what we were talking about, just that lack of ability to have they don't have autonomy in the same way as you would 10 years or 20 years into your career. And you also are, dealing with being in an urban center living alone. So you've got isolation and loneliness. You have this lack of fairness feeling because you are feeling like, you aren't being seen in the same way, or maybe there's ageism.
We did a study in the summer, and that study showed that it was the Gen Z generation that felt that their career was the one being limited the most. And when we looked more into it, what it was at the end of the day was, I think it really was that they didn't have that face-to-face time with the senior leadership team. And that's why it was that generation that felt most at risk and most vulnerable, because our data also showed that the Gen Xers, me, were the most comfortable.
Yeah, we're seeing the exact same thing where it's, a real desire to get back there. And you'd think in that group, there was sort of a misconception that in that group, they just want all the flexibility to be able to work from home, permanently after this. But you're seeing actually a lot of those that group want to return to the office. And I think we also have this expectation that we're sort of need to be moving up within every sort of 18 months to 2 years. We want to be able to show that upward mobility. And for a lot of folks this year, they haven't seen any of that. They feel pretty stalled.
Now, you wrote the book during the pandemic, and you gathered research before the pandemic began and during the pandemic. How has COVID changed burnout in the workplace?
Oh, astronomical, mind blowing, paradigm shifting ways. And mostly because we are dealing with an external macro stress that is limiting this, what I've been writing about is a surge capacity. Surge capacity is something that use mental, sort of physical, adaptive ways of dealing with emergencies. And you're only supposed to think and behave and feel that way for a very short amount of time. Even a natural disaster, a tornado or a hurricane or whatever that thing is, it hits fire, it hits, and then you get into recovery. But we've been dealing with this surge capacity for 20 months, and it's playing a huge toll on our ability to think clearly, for us to make decisions, the simple things that we would normally do every day. And so, from that standpoint, we're also strangely into high growth modes inside of large organizations right now. Every little piece of this puzzle has created the conditions for more burnout. And so that's tough for leaders because they can't solve a pandemic. They can't fix that. And that's really challenging for them. It's almost like, do you say no to growth, or do you, how do you fix this? And it's a very challenging issue.
So, how do you recognize the signs of burnout?
Well, when you look at the big signs, and I like to use Maslow and Leiter's definition and WHO's definition, where it really is these three big signs of burnout, and they show up in exhaustion. So just how fatigued you are every day at the end of the day. Do you feel like it's like, moving through sludge to get going in the morning? How demotivated are you? Do you feel like your brain is just almost frazzled by the end of the day? You're so tired. The frequency of feeling that every single week, we want to look at. If you're feeling that, say 2 to 3 times a week, you're on the path to burnout. Then disengagement. Do you feel sort of mentally distanced from your job? Do you feel like you're not connected to the mission anymore? Do you wonder what you're doing, why you're doing it, why you started this whole thing in the first place, what your career even means anymore? That's why we're seeing the Great Resignation, because a lot of people are just saying, I'm going to leave. I don't even want to be in this career anymore.
So you mentioned the Great Resignation, because I'll give you a stat of a very recent ADP Workplace Insights survey. While salary and benefits, they've historically topped the list of incentives as number one for current and prospective employees, this survey found that Canadian workers now prioritize work-life balance over pay and benefits.
No, and I've been seeing this across other surveys, and there's been global surveys done. And what's so fascinating is, working on the Global Happiness Council, we looked at, Gallup World data. I mean, hundreds of thousands of data points, and pay and compensation, just fair compensation, has been the most important thing for people forever. Always tops the list, and then it's other things underneath that. Now it's so different. I mean, that one survey that came out, that was the global survey by Microsoft, found that it was 4%, only 4% of those people leaving out of 41% of the global workforce that wants to resign, only 4% said it was compensation. So we're seeing this in the ADP data and other data. People don't, when you're faced with your mortality for 20 months, when you're dealing with the potential of sending your kids to an unsafe place every day, or not knowing if you're making the right or wrong decision, or if your family member is going to get sick, or you're going to make your own mother sick in your household, these are things that just fundamentally change us. And then that becomes important as the workplace understands that these fundamental shifts in who we are change the behavioral economics. And that means we have to start thinking about, what really matters to people, because it's playing out in every single corner of our lives.
You have a saying in the book, and it's, you have me at $5. And it's a saying that you use throughout the book. And you give this great example of a former workplace of yours, and they invested in pool tables and ping pong tables, and they really touted about having this unique culture. But at the end of the day, where there once might have been that unique culture that HR recruited you on, it was gone when you started working there, and a new leadership had taken over, and a new culture had been created. Can you fill me in on the term why you have me at $5 is so relevant?
Yeah, and the quote is from Reality Bites, which I love, and it's you and me and $5. And it's this idea that we that's all we need. And a lot of organizations complicate it. And they think that they have to be aspirational. If I tell you I'm going to have, these big ping pong tables and all of these great games rooms and things that you can do, we're going to have happy hour where you can drink beer on, Thursday afternoons. You're going to attract, first of all, a certain type of person, but they're also going to be attracted to the expectation that you've provided them, which means that you better service on those things. You can't just say, we have all this fun. Oh, but I'm going to work you 70 hours a week so you can never engage in the fun. And when it really boils down, people just want to be heard. And that's why this question that I suggest, or these set of 3 questions that I suggest are asked every single week is, how are you? And if you're a human-centered leader, your well-being of your team is the most fundamental. So this is the type of team meeting that should never be downgraded. Downgrade all those other useless meetings, but don't downgrade this one, where you say, how are you? Give me one high, one low from this week. What were some of the, and personal and professional, whatever you want to talk about, totally personal, doesn't need to be a work thing. It can be like, what did you deal with in this week? What was really awesome? What wasn't? And then the third thing that coworkers and bosses should be asking is, what can I do for you, or what can we do for each other to make next week a little bit easier? It's usually a $5 solution, or free. It's usually, I could really get some help on this project, or I could use a little bit more resourcing on this, or I need some training on this because this technology is sort of running me for a loop, or I just need a person to listen to what I'm going through.
You know what? I think I had that quote mixed up from another quote from Jerry Maguire.
You had me at hello.
You had me at hello.
Hello.
So,
Exactly.
Jennifer.
Yes.
So then, Jennifer, well, I feel like, I should ask you, how are you?
I love that you asked, Jeff. It's pub week and I launched my book on Tuesday. So it's been really exciting and surreal, and seeing the book in hand has been wonderful. And I think that's been, I think, a microcosm of this last 2 years. Really high weeks where it's just awesome and epic. And then really crappy weeks that have been really tough. And sometimes that can change, even the volatility can change from the morning to the afternoon, around this house. So I try to really enjoy these good weeks where things are going really great, but recognizing that it's, we have to take advantage of it because it's fleeting right now.
Your ping pong table story reminds me about how employers might attract employees with perks like paid for meals in the workplace, on-site gyms, unlimited vacations. And at the end of the day, these perks often end up being a double-edged sword. So how do these perks play into the burnout epidemic?
That is such a great question. And, the one chapter is sort of good intentions gone wrong, is this idea that we can't begrudge an employer for wanting to try to make the workplace fun and exhilarating and legendary, and that the well-being piece is part of the culture. I think it's just that we're getting it wrong. We're not attacking really the issue, or we're not supporting people's well-being in the right places. We should have all those things. If you're a company that has lots of money, feel free to have these vacations and unlimited whatever food on site. Those are all great perks, but it's not really preventing the burnout. And so that's why when I hear these big declarations of mental health days off, or a week off to deal with my burned out employees, or to fix my burnout employees' burnout, that's not helpful, because it's great to have those as extras. A week off, great, do that. But don't say it's for your burnout employees, because all you're going to do is send them back in the fire, and they're going to continue to burn out.
When I read your chapter and you talk about the unlimited vacation, it really reminded me of something that we do every year at ADP, and it's called the time off tax. It's a figure. It appears to grow every year. And it finds that Canadian workers spend an average of 17 hours of extra work before a vacation, and an extra 17 hours on extra work after a vacation, for a total time off tax of 34 hours.
I love that you've actually measured that, because there's lots of anecdotal, conversations about what it requires for me to actually be away and what it means when I take a vacation. And so I don't want to take a vacation. Why so many, vacation days are left on the table every year. It's because when I go back, it's so tiring that I don't even feel rested. And so again, from a burnout standpoint, having time off is really important. We need to recover. We need to get rest. It's fundamentally healthy for us to take time and just be able to enjoy our families or enjoy, the rest of the world. That's important. But it can't come at the cost of something else.
Through this call today, you've given such amazing tips, some really great insight. I've taken tons of notes. Is there anything impactful that we haven't covered that you want to share?
The only thing that I've been really thinking about lately is just, are we in a sort of Uber taxi moment when it comes to the workforce, this paradigm shifting, disruptive time? And I really do think we are, because it's become a bottom line discussion now. But I think when the pendulum now sort of starts to swing to the middle, we'll actually be in a better place than we were before. And those companies that get on board and they make big decisions, big, bold decisions, like maybe 35-hour work weeks, they're going to be they're going to have their Uber moment. And I think that, others will be catching up and it'll take a long time for them to get there.
Yeah, I think so too. So where can listeners get a hold of you?
Well, my website, jennifer-moss.com. And then LinkedIn, I'm always there. It seems like lots of discussions there. And I've been telling people, you read the book, come and have conversations with me about it. I want to be accessible. So that's a great place to have conversations about the book with me. All
right. You ready for one of my favorite parts of the podcast where I get to ask you your 5 favorite things?
So I should go just rhyme off all my 5 favorite things now? There's all this exciting pressure. I'm like, you're going to ask me specifically?
I'm going to ask you.
No,
I have a list. I have a list.
You
Here we
do?
Go.
Okay,
I do. Number 1, what is your favorite tool to help you get things done?
My calendar. I use it all the time to hack in space. I create space in my calendar, and I also love my out of office. I use it all the time to give people a sense of where I'm at and to manage their expectations.
What is your favorite resource to go to for industry information?
Oh, well, definitely your newsletter, Jeff. But I really do love Harvard Business Review. Obviously, I have an affiliation there because they published the book and I've written a lot for them. But I find that they just have such really great insights and they focus a lot on human-centered leadership recommendations.
All right. What is the first concert that you ever attended?
It was actually, well, I don't want to say Paul Simon. It was Paul Simon. I went to his tour of Graceland, and I was only 8, I think, at the time, but it was pretty cool.
What was your favorite concert that you've ever been to?
You know what? I really loved Prince. Prince was incredible, especially because he would just sit for 3.5 hours on stage and he would play and he didn't care. He didn't leave. And it would just be him and a few other people. And it's not, you would think Prince is just this big personality up on stage. And no, it was like him playing, solo with various instruments. And he's so talented.
He's so talented. And he lived in Toronto.
Yes, that's why I like him even better.
All right, last one. What is your favorite piece of advice that you'd give to a young professional just starting out?
I follow this mantra a lot, and it's how I prevent my own burnout, is you can have anything, but you can't have everything. So it's about understanding that we want to have everything all the time. We have a hard time not getting excited by projects and wanting to be in every place at the same time. And we also have to realize too that, you make choices in your life all the time, all these tiny choices. And if you have the fundamental priorities of what really matters, your ethics, your morality, your family, what you want to make sure that you're not regretting on your deathbed, if you have those really figured out, then you know what your anything is and you're able to define what to say no to.
Great insight to wrap the podcast up. As always, Jennifer Moss, from the very beginning, you had me at hello.
I'm so glad. Well, here, you and me and $5. I think it was you and me and $0, and I loved it. So thanks, Jeff. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And this is the part of the podcast where I thank everyone for listening in. I know it's tough to find time to carve out for thought leadership, and I appreciate you, the listener, for making the time for us. Anything we can do to help ourselves get better at something is time well spent. On our next episode, we'll be talking with more HR experts about today's most important HR issues. I'm Jeff Livingston. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and be kind. We'll see you soon on our next episode of ADP's Insights at Work.